Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of the Oxygen Addict Triathlon podcast. It's changed my usual schedule. You've noticed we're not going to have any sponsors on this version at all, and it's mainly going to be coaching advice and hopefully some advice to you to help keep you safe and keep your family safe through these extraordinary times that we're living in this time of global pandemic. We wondered how to approach this. We wondered whether to put out a usual edition of the show and have this section at the start and then have an interview later. What I've decided to do is put this section out now as its own standalone show. I don't think it's going to be very long. It's probably going to be in the region of 15 minutes, I would imagine. And then I'm going to put out a usual edition of the show later on in the week. I've got a cracking interview with Joe Skipper that I recorded a couple of weeks ago, just after he won Ironman New Zealand. And it's a really fun conversation. It's really lighthearted. It somehow feels at odds to play his interview out after what I'm going to describe and say to you here about training and things going forward. So we will run the usual edition of the show as usual later in the week, but I wanted to talk to everybody about ways that you can approach training and, more importantly, ways you can keep yourself safe and your family and friends safe through training while we're all living through this extraordinary time. So a bit of context here for you. Obviously, long-time listeners of the show will know that I have a particular training methodology that I adhere to, and it's always been, we'll do our high-intensity training on the bike, we'll do steady running, and we'll do a mix of specific drills and speed work in the swim. The key thing there is there's a mix of high-intensity work and low-intensity work, and over the last week, I became gradually more and more aware and more uncomfortable that I wanted to make sure that the advice I was giving to my athletes was not going to compromise them in any way. And I was very lucky that in my early days as a coach, in one of the coach education sessions I was in, one of the older coach tutors said that the guiding principle he worked by was the same that doctors do, which is the principle at first, do no harm. And that always stuck with me as the most important thing in coaching. If I'm wondering whether to give an athlete a harder or easier session, they'll get an easier one, because I want to make sure we stay this side of injury. And again, long-time listeners will know that that's been my approach to trying to keep you free from running injuries and things like that. So I started thinking, is there any evidence out there? What can we find out? Which experts could we talk to find out about possible impact of the kind of triathlon training we do on an athlete's immune system? Is it okay to just keep on training normally, or is there a danger that doing either high intensity training or that doing very long duration training is going to somehow negatively impact our immune systems? Because my guiding principle here is I always felt that doing some training would make your immune system stronger, but I've experienced in myself and in other athletes that some of the sessions that we do can leave you completely wiped out afterwards. So I reached out on Twitter, and some of you will have seen this. I reached out to some of the leading sports scientists that I know and that I know of. I talked to Dr. Richard Ferguson at Loughborough University. I talked to Dr. Simon Marwood at Liverpool Hope. I talked to Stephen Seiler, Dr. Stephen Seiler, and amongst other people who pointed me in the direction, interestingly, of the same kind of studies, 2 or 3 of the same studies that came up time and time again. And we'll talk about those a little bit more later on. We ended up looking a lot at the work of somebody called David Nyman and Laurel Wentz. And I'm going to give you the advice that I kind of read. I assimilated it in my brain, and I thought, right, I have to do something very, very different for my athletes' training to help keep them safe in this time when we're trying to prevent the spread of a highly communicable disease. Okay, so headline figure is that first up, if you compare yourself to an average sedentary person who does no activity, there is evidence that doing some amount of moderate intensity exercise is actually going to improve your immune system. Okay, so it's like a J curve. If we start off on the left-hand side of the J, the person here on the left does no exercise and has what we'll say average immunity. As we do some amount of moderate exercise, what we find is that our immune system actually gets stronger. But then as we do more and more exercise, or we do higher and higher intensity exercise, this J continues on to the right and upwards. And what we find is beyond a certain point, our immune system is more compromised than it would be if we did nothing at all. And my driving philosophy behind talking to you today and helping with my athletes is, for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until we get a lay of the land of how things are going to go in society, I want there to be absolutely no doubt that we're doing the things to support people's health first and put fitness to one side. Okay, so the study from, I'll tell you this, it'll be in the show notes. It's from the Journal of Sport and Health Science, Volume 8, Issue 3, May 2019. And the study's called The Compelling Link Between Physical Activity and the Body's Defense System. Again, go and check this out through the link in the show notes. You'll see this very clear J curve. And fortunately for us, the article is very well written. I've seen other articles by Nyman who's given us a set of guidelines to work from. So we'll talk to you about those here. Nyman puts forward what he calls the 60-60-60 training strategy. Now, this is aimed at runners. And for runners, he says, we do a maximum of 60 minutes of running per day, a maximum of 60% of VO2 max, and a maximum of 60 miles a week to optimally support somebody's immune system. Beyond any of those limits, so more than 60 minutes of exercise a day, higher than 60% of VO2 max, and more than a maximum of 60 miles a week, so think of that as around 7-ish hours of exercise, our immune system is going to become gradually more and more compromised. Okay, so I've adapted this for multisport. So again, hands in the air, we are making our own judgments about this as we go forward. And I'm not a world expert, but I've adjusted this for multisport to say we're going to have a maximum of 75% of FTP, or if you like, the top of zone 2 heart rate. With running, we're going to cap ourselves at E pace. So again, it's kind of that zone 2 kind of heart rate. So for most of you, that'll be usual. And we're going to have a maximum of 60 minutes per day of exercise. So we're not going to do any long sessions longer than 60 minutes at all. And I recognize that is a massive shift for most of us. So these guidelines are for how do I best support my immune system and prevent it from getting run down. And by that, what I'm thinking is if we can get you doing enough exercise to stay mentally healthy, if we can do enough exercise to promote our immune system, but not decrease it in any way, that's got to be a good thing. So with all of my athletes, I've adapted their plans now. So they've only got sessions that follow those guidelines. We've got a maximum of sort of 7 hours of training a week, a maximum of 60 minutes a day, no high intensity work at all. And the other change we've made is we're going to schedule this in 3-week blocks. So 2 weeks of, if you like, standard training and then a recovery block. And again, we've applied this to all our athletes for the next 3 weeks, and we're going to reassess on a daily and a weekly basis. So I'm going to read you out some of the things I've written to my athletes and see if this resonates with you. We've put, the aim of the training in this week is to give you daily exercise with structure that will not impact your immune system. To help protect your immune system, we're going to limit exercise to a maximum of 60 minutes per day and a steady perception of effort. We don't want anyone going hard or long at all. Okay, and then we've got some general rules for our athletes here. If you're feeling any signs of illness, cough, cold, or raised temperature, do not train. During this period, limit your training to 60 minutes per day total. We're always going to have a recovery day each week, either total rest or a 30-minute very easy recovery ride. If you're also going to do strength and conditioning and yoga, do it on the days when you've got a shorter run scheduled. So I've got a couple of runs in the week that are 30 or 45 minutes. So your total training time doesn't exceed 60 minutes. No HIIT type sessions. I'm advising my athletes to do your rides indoors during this period. And I'm advising athletes to stay out of the pool entirely during this period. Now, those last two points there, I'll tell you my reasoning behind it. We're entering a time when there's going to be a lot of stress and strain on the NHS and the medical services. And I think if we can reduce the risk of people having bike crashes and needing to go to hospital, that can only be a good thing, right? I'm advising people to stay out of the pool for 2 reasons. Firstly, we know it's not uncommon for people to pick up bugs when they go to the pool. And secondly, with the whole social distancing thing that's going out, I want to try as much as we can to keep people away from the idea of traveling to places to do stuff where you're going to potentially be mixing with tens, dozens, 20s, hundreds of people who have come from different places. Now, by the time you hear this, it might be actually that all gyms and pools have been closed, but at the moment that isn't the case, certainly here in the UK. I know from our athletes around the world, there are some places where pools are already completely closed. Okay, so for swimming type stuff, stretch cord work, that's fine, but stay out of the water. Okay. We're going to reassess this on an ongoing basis. As I said, things are changing fast, and it might be that in a week's time or 2 weeks' time, the advice I've given you here is out of date, and I'll deal with that as we go along. But I'm hoping what this is going to do with our listeners is it's going to raise in your consciousness the idea that doing things as normal isn't the best way through things at the moment. Just driving ahead with going to a spin class because it's what you've always done, that isn't the best thing to do right now. Even doing high intensity work on the turbo on your own isn't the best thing that you can do right now. Now, I recognize that there's a mental aspect to this. I recognize we need to feel that we've done some hard work to feel better about ourselves or feel better about our mood. I'm honestly advising you at this time, try and limit yourself to the amount of higher intensity work you do to those guidelines I've given you, because your immune system is going to be more important. And I think with an hour's worth of steady exercise a day, don't forget that's still 7 or 6.5 hours worth of exercise every week. If people did that week in, week out, that is still plenty of exercise. If it turns out that races in the summer are not cancelled, and you've trained for 6 or 7 hours a week for 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 weeks or whatever it turns out to be, if you've consistently done that training, what we've done is like a traditional base building period anyway, and that is going to have a positive effect towards building your fitness if your mind needs to hear that right now. But again, I don't think that that's the important thing for you right now. I think we've all got to shift to thinking we're going to preserve and promote our immune system so we don't pick up any bugs wherever possible, so we don't pass on any bugs or, God forbid, COVID-19 to any other vulnerable members of our family or society. Okay? Now, we've got some other stuff we wrote here, and I'm going to read some of this out to you that we had some pushback from our athletes in the group. The vast majority were on board immediately and said, yes, I understand. We had about 10% of our athletes said words to the effect of, I don't like the fact that I wasn't given a choice in this, because if I was given a choice, I'd have kept my old training plan because I either believe my event is still going to happen and I want to keep training towards it, or I believe that I'm an adult and I should be allowed to make my own decision. So this is our reply to those people. I've said, first and foremost, and most importantly, we've got a duty and responsibility to do everything we can to keep you fit, healthy and safe. And actually, we could swap that around and say, my duty is to keep you safe, healthy and fit in that order. Aside from the fact it's pretty safe to assume there'll be no races going forward for at least the next 3 or 4 months, our role is still to get athletes as race fit and race ready as possible if we look at it through that lens. And in the current global situation, the steps we're going to do to achieve that are exactly what we've done. We're giving you everything that your body can absorb through this new lens of we're not going to compromise anyone's immune systems. Okay, we're going to keep you healthy, we're going to keep you active and as triathlon fit as possible. And it may not be in the way you expect when thinking about traditional training, but that doesn't mean it's not right. And more to the point, it's no longer, the old context is no longer the context we're operating in. All of the usual old rules have been suspended and we've got a whole new blank canvas in front of us. Okay, for us or me to suggest in any way, directly or indirectly, to enable anything other than this is at best irresponsible and at worst dangerous. And to you, your families, your wider community, we want to promote health in you, your families and society in general as much as possible. Okay, so I would really start to question, and I know other people are going to have different opinions on this, I would really encourage you to see this through the lens of how do we best keep you and your loved ones safe in this time of tremendous upheaval. Okay, we've read all the science that we think is out there that supports this. I've done that so that, not so that you don't have to. I encourage you to go out there and do that. And like I said, I'm going to post a link to the articles that I've read here as well for you to make your own assessments and judgments of it. And I encourage that kind of healthy discussion, but please at least start thinking about whether it's in your best interest to do what you've always done or to completely change what you've done before it's mandated or forced upon us by government or legality or whatever. Okay. Now, we're at the moment ambitiously working on a short-term basis. I'm talking about the next 3 weeks with the athletes I work with, and we're going to review as things change. Okay. But I'm not going to say sorry for this. I'm going to assure you that whatever changes we make in the future, whatever advice I give you in the future, it's driven by sort of my desire and responsibility to keep you safe and healthy as well as fit. Okay, so I'm aware that it feels heavy. It feels a big thing to go on the to go on the radio, to go on a podcast and say. I'm aware of feeling a responsibility to kind of keep the show going week in and week out and maintain normalcy for people. But I think it's important to put this out there to our wider listenership to really say, look, things have changed. Really consider what would happen to you if you had a crash on your bike when you were out riding and you broke your leg. In a week's time, you got to hospital to find that there are there's no A&E doctors there. Let's all do everything that we can to think about wider society, not just to think about our own fitness. All right, guys, listen, as I said, I'll be posting a regular edition of our show in a couple of days' time, that interview with Joe Skipper, but I really do genuinely wish you all the best. Anyone's got any questions about this, feel free to email them over to help@oxygenaddict.com or get in touch through social on Twitter at OA Try Podcast or on Facebook and, the usual channels. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all staying safe, and I give you all my best wishes for this coming period of uncertainty. See ya.